Good evening, and a lichtige Chanukah, an illuminated Chanukah, and a freilichen Chanukah, a happy Chanukah. Let's light up the darkness. If you missed it earlier today, I went live from Mayan Yisrael with a musical Hallel led by Moshe Storch. It's on the Facebook page. Beautiful singing Hallel, similar to how we always open the 2-minute warm-up of AT Daily. But it was today's Hallel, and it was for Hanukkah. Hallel is basic when it's musical, or when it's not musical. What we're reciting are Psalms 113 through 118, and we say those at special times of year. Holidays get Hallel, songs of praise. Okay, who's in the house on a Sunday night, 5th night of Hanukkah? Yehud in South Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Guy in Ohio, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx, Elvis in New York, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bell in Texas, Yosef in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, Ian in Seattle, Melissa in Great Neck. Why is chat disabled? I know it's not disabled. Sometimes it just does that to me, and then I have to reload the YouTube. Franco in Trieste, Italy. Spencer in Connecticut. Aoife in Florida. Frank in San Pedro. Alan in New York City. Okay. Our daf tonight is page 12 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 1, the composition of various types of courts, whether for criminal matters, civil matters, or now we've been discussing ritual matters like sanctifying or at least intercalating the month, deciding whether a month will have 29 or 30 days based on is the new moon sighted or not. And then that will, either by default or by design, sanctify the next day as Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the following month. That's called intercalating the month, or intercalating the year, which means adding a leap month, which we do in 7 of 19 years. Now that's exactly that. It used to be more as needed when the Sanhedrin would. Right now the calendar has been preset into the future, but when the Sanhedrin decided whether to add a day to a month and decided whether to add a month to a year, how many judges were required for that? That's what we've been talking about. We pick this up near the bottom of page 11b. The sages taught in a baraisa, the court may intercalate the years only when the court is located in Judea, where Jerusalem is. And if they intercalated it when located in the Galilee, for example, when the Sanhedrin was located in Tiberias, so then would then the year be intercalated, since you just said the court has to be in Judea in order to intercalate the year? And if they intercalated it when the court was located in the Galilee, the year is nevertheless intercalated. They shouldn't do it while they're up there, but if they have to do it while they're up there, the year is intercalated. Hananiah of Ono testified, even if the court already formally intercalated the year when located in the Galilee, it is not intercalated. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, says, what is the reasoning of Hananiah of Ono? And the verse states, "But to the places that the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, to his abode shall you seek, and there you shall come." Deuteronomy 12:5, which is saying that once the children of Israel enter the Holy Land, in the beginning there would be the location of the tabernacle, right? The Mishkan, the portable sanctuary of the Lord that we had in the desert, and for 400 years after we entered the Holy Land, until David picked the spot and his son Solomon built the temple. And then that was the spot, the Temple Mount, where the first temple stood for a little over 400 years. Then there was a 70-year Babylonian exile. And then the second temple stood on that spot for a little over 400 years until the exile began in the year 70 of the Common Era. So that's the spot where the Sanhedrin is supposed to meet. Now, on the one hand, the commandment is telling you it has to be in Jerusalem. On the other hand, what it's telling you is it doesn't have to be in Jerusalem. It has to be where the Lord has chosen, right? And so, in fact, it wasn't in Jerusalem during those first 400 years. It was in Shiloh, a couple other places. And, once we're in the exile and it's not meeting in Jerusalem because the Romans have made that impossible, well, then shouldn't we be able to have the Sanhedrin where we need to have it, even if it's not in Jerusalem? The point of the law being follow one central authority. Follow wherever the Lord has set. Now, since it became set in Jerusalem, it starts to mean Jerusalem. But do we mean it must always mean Jerusalem? Or when it could no longer be done in Jerusalem, does that mean the year can't be intercalated? And at the end of the day, no. I mean, they have to intercalate the year. So that's why this is a minority opinion. And this is interpreted as every pursuit that you shall pursue in the area of halacha, the area of Jewish law, must be only in the abode of the omnipresent, in close proximity to Jerusalem, i.e. in Judea, because that's where it became for 1,000 years, more or less, but not necessarily, right? And thank God it's back to being in Jerusalem. But this idea that you shouldn't become a fractured and divided people means that they did intercalate the years when they were unable to meet on the Temple Mount. Now, the sages taught in a Baraisa that the court may intercalate the year only during the day. And if the court intercalated it at night, it is not intercalated. The court has to get together again the next day. And the court may sanctify the month, declare it's Rosh Chodesh. The court may sanctify the month only during the day. The court can't meet and do that at night. And if the court sanctified it at night, it is not sanctified. And Rav Abba says, what is the verse from which this law is derived? Psalm 81 verse 4. Sound the shofar at the new moon. That's when a new month begins. At the concealed time for our festival day. On which festival is the new moon concealed? You must say it is Rosh Hashanah, which occurs on the first of the month. Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh for Tishrei, for the month of Tishrei. Whereas all other festivals like Passover and Sukkot and Hanukkah and Purim, all occur at other times of the month, not on Rosh Chodesh. Only Rosh Hashanah is the one when the moon is concealed. And it is written in the next verse, for it is a statute for Israel, a judgment of the God of Jacob. Psalm 81 verse 5. Therefore, just as all civil judgment is done during the day, a court has to render verdicts in civil cases, monetary law cases, during daylight, so too is the sanctification of Rosh Hashanah and the sanctification of the month in general done during the day. The sages taught in a Baraisa, the court does not intercalate the year, add a month of Adar, a second month of Adar. Now we're at the top of page 12a. The court does not intercalate the year during years of famine. Right? If it's a year of famine, that's not a year that we add a month to. On its face, that makes great sense. If this is a bad year, let's not add another month to it. But what does it mean is that when grain is scarce, intercalating the year would exacerbate the food shortage by delaying the Omer offering, which is brought in Nisan. thereby prolonging the period during which the new crop is forbidden. Let me make an adjustment here. Okay. It is taught in a baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, also known as Rebbe. It is taught in a baraisa. Baraisa is contemporaneous with a Mishna, older teachings in the Talmud. It is taught in a baraisa that Rebbe says that this principle can be demonstrated based on an incident related in the Bible. The verse states with regard to the prophet Elisha, quote, "And there came a man from Baal Shalisha, and he brought to the man of God," Elisha the prophet, "he brought to him bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and 20 ears of corn in his sack. And he said, give to the people that they may eat." That's 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42. Now, we analyze this incident. You do not have in all of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, an environment in which fruit ripens more swiftly than in Baal Shalisha, right? This is the first place in Israel where the new produce in a particular year is going to be ripe. That's the place where food ripens the earliest. And even so, only one of the 7 species that characterize Israel had ripened at that time, as the verse states that he brought him bread of the first fruits. Right? There's also olives and pomegranates and figs and barley. Right? But they're saying that of all the 7 types of produce that characterize Israel, only the bread was ready. Right? So this must mean the barley bread or the wheat bread. So let's keep reading. Even so, only one of the 7 species had ripened at that time. And lest you say that the verse speaks of wheat, which ripens close to the time of the festival of Shavuos, right, much later, that's in the summer, as opposed to barley, which is ripe even before Passover, which is usually in the spring around April, right, which ripens close to the time of the festival of Shavuos with regard to wheat, and the verse states barley. Well, it says barley, so it's only the barley was ready. Unless you say that the incident took place before the Omer offering was sacrificed, the verse states, give to the people that they may eat. As they were permitted to eat it, it must be that the incident was after the Omer offering was brought, which is brought on the 2nd night of Passover. Right? So this is in the fastest ripening place. It's after Passover, and yet only the barley had become ripe. Nothing else. It means that it's an early year, and this is the type of year when we would add an Adar, we would add an extra month so that people would have time before Passover for more species of produce to become ripe and be ready for eating. But because it's a year of famine, we don't want to add any more waiting time before people can harvest. So, based on this, say that even in the place in which fruit ripened the fastest in all the land of Israel, after the Omer had been brought, only the barley had ripened. Evidently, the year was fit to be intercalated, because the spring produce was not sufficiently mature in time. And for what reason did the prophet Elisha not intercalate it? Because it was a year of scarcity, a year of famine. As described in the Bible, see 2 Kings 4:38, and everyone was running to the granary. Intercalating the year would have made it even more difficult for them to obtain produce. New subject. The sages taught in a baraisa, the court may not intercalate the year before Rosh Hashanah. The court can't make the decision that they're going to add an extra month to the year before they're in that year. Right? They can't meet and have deliberations about whether we're going to add a month to the coming year until after Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, after they're in the year that they're trying to intercalate. That they're considering whether they're going to intercalate it or not. Right? The court may not intercalate the year before Rosh Hashanah. And if the court intercalated it this early, it is not intercalated. Their verdict is not a verdict. They're going to have to meet again and make that decision after Rosh Hashanah. But if there was a need to intercalate the year early, if there was a need to do this early, due to exigent circumstances, meaning they were being persecuted. The Sanhedrin was being persecuted. The Romans were threatening that if the court met, they were going to kill our sages. And so they had to meet in secret. And the only way to meet in secret was to do it early before Rosh Hashanah. Then they may intercalate it immediately after Rosh Hashanah. Immediately after Rosh Hashanah, but still not before Rosh Hashanah. Even so, they may intercalate it only by adding a second month of Adar. The only month that gets added is a second month of Adar in the spring, the month of Purim. Now that they're going to add a month to the year, and they've already made that decision around Rosh Hashanah, right, which is in the fall, nevertheless, they can't choose, some other month to double up on. The only month we double up on when we intercalate the year is Adar. The Gemara asks, is that so, that the intercalation may be determined only after Rosh Hashanah? But the sages of Eretz Yisrael sent the following encoded message to Rava during the time of the Roman persecution, right? So this is a code. I'm going to tell you the code and how they decoded it. A pair of Torah scholars came from Rakath. That's the biblical name for Tiberius. See Joshua 19:35, which was the seat of the Sanhedrin in Rava's time. Right? They weren't able to meet on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, so they moved the Sanhedrin up to Tiberia, which is near the Sea of Galilee. They meant to reach the diaspora community, but, now this is the note, but the pair was apprehended by the eagle. Right? So what are they saying? They're saying that Roman soldiers, whose symbol was the imperial eagle, had captured them. And in their possession were precious items made in Luz. So the Gemara interprets the story to explain, and what are those items from Luz? Techeles, the sky blue dye that we use on our tzitzis, right, on our fringes. The message continued, in the merit of divine mercy, and in their merit, they were spared execution and emerged in peace. Nevertheless, they did not reach their destination. So the message continued. And the offspring of Nachshon, who are the offspring of Nachshon? So Nachshon in the Bible is Nachshon ben Aminadab. Nachshon ben Aminadab, who was from the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. And he, when Moses lifted his staff to part the Red Sea did not part. Not yet. Everyone's like, what's going to happen? Nachshon ben Aminadab had tremendous... Aminadab? I always say his name wrong. Aminadab. Okay, Aminadab. Nachshon had complete emunah, complete faith in God and in our teacher Moses, and said, okay, well, God told him to part the sea, and he lifted his staff, so I'm going. And he walked into the water, and when he got into the water up to his nose, that's when the water of the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, parted. And that was a tremendous merit to him, Nachshon ben Aminadab, and all his descendants, right? And what are we called today? Jews. Why are we called Jews and not Israelites, right? All Jews around the world, because for the most part, we're descendants of Judah. Unless, like myself, you're descended from Levi, or even more specifically, one of the Levites, Aaron, and his descendants are known as Kohanim. Okay, some people might know that they're descended from Benjamin, but the rest of the tribes, Jews don't know if they're who they're descended from. But we're generally known as Jews because we're descendants of Judah, and this is saying descendants of Nachshon, right? So this is sort of meritorious descendants of Judah. And the offspring of Nachshon sought to establish a pillar, meaning they sought to add a month to the year. Establish a pillar, add a month to the year, intercalate the year. The Romans didn't want us, communicating with each other about having our own calendar separate than the Roman calendar, and that's why this whole thing is coded. But they need to get the message out to the diaspora that the Sanhedrin in Tiberia is adding a month to the year, so that the diaspora and the community in Israel will all be on the same page with the calendar. Says the note in code, but that Edomite, right? Edomite, descendant of Esau. Who does that mean? Rome, right? Rome is always associated with Esau, or in English, Esau. The descendants of Esau also known as Edom, are Rome, i.e. Western civilization that's not Jewish. But that Edomite, now at that time, it just meant Rome. But that Edomite, the local Roman governor, did not allow them to intercalate the year. They're saying in the note. But that Edomite did not allow them to intercalate the year, meaning the governor did not allow them to do it. Nevertheless, the members of the assembly gathered and established a pillar, meaning we added the month, in the month in which Aaron the priest died. Who was Aaron the priest? Moses' brother. Aaron, the first Kohen Gadol, the first high priest. Meaning the sages of Eretz Yisrael convened in the month of Av, which is August, which is before Rosh Hashanah, and they determined that the following year should be intercalated, and they wanted to get the word out early because they needed to, because in that time of persecution, it was not so easy to get the word out. So evidently then, in exigent circumstances, intercalation may be done even before Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara answers, the court may calculate the need for an extra month even before Rosh Hashanah. But they may not reveal and publicize that decision until after Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara asks about the language of the coded message. From where may it be inferred that this word pillar, in Hebrew netziv, is a term denoting a month? Why does netziv, pillar, mean month in this code? As it is written, 1 Kings 4:7, and Solomon had 12 officers known as netzivim. Now the word pillars is being reused to refer to officers of the king's guard. Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel, and they provided for the king and his household for a month in the year. So officers, netzivim, pillars, being associated, 12 officers with 12 months, because each of these officers needed to provide certain, I think, offerings or other, items of expense on behalf of the nation for 1 month per year. Once this verse was quoted, the Gemara inquires, but isn't it written afterward, and one officer that was in the land? So what does that officer refer to? This would indicate that there were more than 12 netzivim, and Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman answer, one says, one officer was appointed over all the others, but the other one says the extra officer corresponded to the intercalated month. In years where an extra month was added, they needed a 13th month, like a 13th officer. The sages taught in a baraisa, the court may not intercalate the year from one year to another, and it does not intercalate 3 successive years, one directly after the other, right? They can't decide this year, we're going to intercalate the next 2 years. Can't do that. And you can't intercalate 3 years in a row. And you could see if you added a month 3 times, you'd be getting pretty far away from the solar year. And the whole purpose of adding a month from time to time is to keep us sunk up with the solar year. Rabbi Shimon says there was an incident involving Rabbi Akiva at the time when he was incarcerated in prison, and he intercalated 3 years, one after the other, violated this rule of don't do 3 years in a row. And the sages said to Rabbi Shimon, is there any proof from there? Rabbi Akiva merely made the calculations, but a special court sat and established each one at its time. Still, apparently they did 3 in a row, but maybe they had 2 that would have happened anyway, and a third because they had extremely exigent circumstances involving famine or danger or who knows what. And they had to make some kind of exception. I don't know. The sages taught in a baraisa, the court may not intercalate the year in the sabbatical year, so as not to prolong the prohibitions of the sabbatical year, nor in the year after the sabbatical year, right? When you can't go in and plant your crops, we don't want an extra month of that year because it's difficult for the people. And likewise, the year after the sabbatical year, which also has its own restrictions. Or rather, when there was not so much produce available, since no produce had been grown by the farmers in the previous Shemitah year, the 7th year of the sabbatical year cycle. So when is the court accustomed to intercalate? On the eve of the sabbatical year, which causes no particular challenges, right? The year before a sabbatical year, that's a good year to intercalate. Nevertheless, the courts of the house of Rabban Gamliel would intercalate the year in the year after the sabbatical year. And they disagree with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between these Tanaim. As it is taught in a baraisa, one may not import vegetables in the sabbatical year from outside the land of Israel. And our rabbis permitted importing such produce. So Rav Steinsaltz explains, according to the opinion that permits importing produce from outside the land of Israel during a sabbatical year when the farmers are not permitted to plant their own fields, you'd think there might be a shortage. Now, when the spiritual level of the nation was high, God arranged it all so that in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, there was so much abundance, just like sort of Joseph's time of plenty. In Egypt, there would be so much produce in the 6th year that they'd have no problem getting through the 7th year. And since they didn't have to work the land, they had a year of study, right, where they could just focus on Torah studies. Since they had no excuse that they're too busy working, well, they don't have to work the land in that 7th year. And there's going to be plenty for everybody. But as the spiritual level of the nation fell, that 6th year wasn't so plentiful, and yet they were trying to keep observing that 7th year of not planting. So the people are not to go hungry. At a certain point, they had to import food from the land of Israel. They weren't going to plant the fields in Israel, but they needed to bring in food that people could eat from outside the land. According to one opinion, permitted. According to another opinion, not permitted. Right? So, according to the opinion that permits importing produce from outside the land of Israel, there is no concern that the food supply will be exhausted. Therefore, the year following the sabbatical year may be intercalated. And by inference, according to the opinion that you can't import food during the Shemitah year, the following year will be a year where it's difficult to get enough food. So we don't want to lengthen that year, and we should not intercalate the year following the Shemitah year. Now, the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the difference between these opinions concerning whether we can import produce from outside the land of Israel during a Shemitah year? So Rabbi Yirmiyah says the difference between these opinions relates to whether one is concerned for their clods of earth. Right? So, okay, there's the issues of hunger and planting and keeping the farmers in business, etc. But, maybe the nation's not really going to starve, and so we can't just be so quick to dismiss other underlying halachic issues, like this one, clods of earth. Can you bring in produce from outside the land of Israel? The concern is if that produce is uprooted, like if you're bringing vegetables. It didn't say about grain. The problem is vegetables. So if you're bringing carrots and radishes and beets and other kinds of root vegetables that are going to come up with clods of earth, with dirt, and you're going to bring dirt, right? In other words, land from outside the land of Israel into the land of Israel. You're going to bring dirt from outside of Israel into Israel. There's a concern that you're going to bring pieces of dead bodies, right? Because outside the land of Israel, where other nations live who aren't subject to the laws of the Torah, and they're not concerned about walking over a grave, which would make a Jew tumah, ritually impure, and therefore prohibited from entering the holy temple until he goes through a purification process of immersing in a mikvah, waiting some days, being sprinkled with the water purification, etc. Because Jews are subject to that, Jews within the land of Israel are very careful to mark where every grave is. Outside of Israel, there's no reason to do that. Other nations are not subject to these laws, and they would have no reason to do that. Therefore, we don't know where, there might be a body buried, and some vegetable might come along with some dirt that had, some piece of a corpse, some little piece of bone or something, and when a body was buried and plowed over and it became a farm field. So because we're concerned about that, we don't want dirt from outside of Israel coming into Israel. According to one opinion, that's enough of a concern that we don't allow vegetables into Israel during the Shemitah year from outside of Israel. According to another opinion, we're not so concerned about that happening because it's so unlikely, and even a little bit gets in, it's so little that it would be nullified that we're not concerned about it. Those are the two sides of that discussion on another page and for another day. The Gemara here moves on. The sages taught in a baraisa, the court may not intercalate the year due to tumah, ritual impurity, like I was just talking about walking over a grave. But here it means in the event that most of the Jewish people are in a state of impurity, like they just went through a war, they walked through battlefields, they came into contact with the dead, there were so many funerals, etc. And maybe there's no waters of sprinkling available, or if it's available, all this happened too soon to one of the festivals to get everyone through a purification process. So do we want to delay, for example, Passover? Right? If we know we're not going to be able to get the majority of the nation pure by Passover, maybe that's a good reason to intercalate the year, add another Adar. Now there's an extra 4 weeks to get everyone through a purification process before they might come to Jerusalem and want to enter the temple to bring an offering like the Paschal lamb. So that might be a good reason to intercalate the year. But here we're hearing the court may not intercalate the year due to ritual impurity among the majority of the nation. Why wouldn't they do that? Well, for one thing, if the majority of the nation is ritually impure, we can bring the offerings anyway. Right? When the majority of the nation is impure, we can bring offerings. Now, maybe the people can't walk onto the Temple Mount, or maybe they can, that's a different question. But there's definitely a halacha that when the majority of the nation is impure, we can go ahead with the avoda, go ahead with the daily offerings brought on behalf of the nation in the holy temple. So maybe that's a reason why we shouldn't intercalate the year on behalf, due to a majority of the people being tameh. But let's see what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yehuda says the court may intercalate the year due to tumah. This is a reason to intercalate the year. Minority opinion, but he says you can. Rabbi Yehuda said there was an incident involving Chizkiah Hamelech, right? King Chizkiah, the king of Judea, who intercalated the year due to tumah. In 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 2. And after doing so, he requested compassion for himself. In other words, he asked God to forgive him for having done this. What do we read? For a multitude of the people, even many of Ephraim and Manasseh, Issachar and Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves, yet they ate the Paschal lamb, not as is written. Everyone's supposed to be tahor, in a state of ritual purity, when they eat the Paschal lamb at Passover. For Chizkiah had prayed for them, saying, may the good Lord pardon everyone who sets his heart to seek God, though he not be cleansed according to the purification that pertains to sacred items. Right? So many people in the nation, maybe not the majority of the nation, but many people were tameh, perhaps because they were recently at war, I don't remember, or because he was reestablishing holiness, because he was a good king after several, idolatrous kings. And he was getting them back to Torah and back to doing their obligations. And at any rate, a bunch of them were tameh when they ate of the Pesach. And he prayed for mercy for them and for him intercalating the year, trying to avoid this for them. So Rabbi Shimon says, if the court intercalated the year due to tumah, it is indeed intercalated. But if the tumah is ultimately a legitimate reason for intercalating the year, for what reason did Chizkiah request compassion for himself? Why did he ask for forgiveness from God if this was a legitimate thing? If it was a legitimate reason to intercalate the year so that more people would have a chance to become tahor before eating of the Pesach, then he did the right thing. Why is he asking God to have compassion on him? Says the Gemara, because the court may intercalate only the month of Adar, and he intercalated the month of Nisan during the month of Nisan itself. Oh, that's different. He didn't add Adar so that there would be an extra month between Purim and the month Adar. In the middle of Adar is Purim, and 1 month later, in the middle of Nisan, is Pesach. So normally we would add an extra Adar, and that decision, how early does it have to be made? Can it be made in Adar? We'll come to that question. But only Adar is the month that gets added. According to this account, what Chizkiah did is they were already in Nisan, so less than 2 weeks to go until Passover, when he realized so many people were impure, and he said, you know what? We're going to add another month. We're going to intercalate the year, but what we're going to add is Nisan, another Nisan. So this first Nisan, we're not going to celebrate Passover, you're going to celebrate it in the second Nisan. Now that would be an extraordinary occurrence, well outside of the law, and then we can understand why he would have to pray for mercy on his behalf, because maybe a king can order that, but not within Torah law. In other words, he can get away with it, but it's not kosher. So that's this explanation of why he asked for mercy for himself. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the incident did not involve the intercalation of the year by adding an extra Nisan. Rather, what Chizkiah did is he appealed for mercy because he encouraged the Jewish people to bypass the standard first Pesach in Nisan and rather to observe Pesach sheini, which the Torah includes that there's a second Passover a month later. We don't observe that Passover, although we'll note it in synagogue on that day. Some people will eat matzah on that day. But what Pesach Sheini was for is that in ancient times, and it was an answer to a request from Jews in the wilderness after we came out of Egypt and received the Torah. And at the time of the first Passover, or let's say the second Passover, because the first Passover was in Egypt, but the first Passover according to Torah law, a year later, some of them had been burying dead bodies. And so they were impure, couldn't get pure in time to eat of the Pesach. They came to Moses and said, hey, we were doing a good deed. We were burying a dead body. It's the highest mitzvah, one of the highest mitzvahs there is. And now we don't get to do Passover? And Moses said, good question. Let me check with God. God, these guys want to observe Passover, but they're tameh. What do we do? God said, for people who are tameh at Passover or too far away to get to the center, the Jewish people, eventually that was Jerusalem, but they're too far away to get there in time, so they can eat the Pesach a month later, Pesach Sheini. So what Chizkiah did is, even to the people of Jerusalem who were there at that time, because they were tameh, he said, you know what? Don't worry about it. Even if there's a chance that you could get pure in time, it's okay. What we're going to do as a nation is we're going to focus on Pesach Sheini, the second Passover a month later. Again, not something he should have done, but at least he was working within the framework of existing Torah law. Having quoted the Tosefta in its entirety, the Gemara now clarifies a few of these details. The master said above, Rabbi Yehuda says, the court may intercalate the year due to tumah, in order to delay the paschal offerings so that the people can perform them in a state of purity. So apparently Rabbi Yehuda holds that the prohibition against performing the temple service in a state of tumah, of ritual impurity, is merely overridden in cases involving the public. Although the offerings may be brought when most of the public is in a state of impurity, this course of action is not ideally permitted, and one must attempt to find another way to perform the offerings in purity, like by intercalating the year, which will lead to more people being in a state of purity at the time of Passover. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a baraisa, the front plate, the tzitz, right, the golden front plate on the forehead of the high priest, which was a gold foreplate called the tzitz, and on it was written, holy to God, holy to Hashem. So the tzitz affects acceptance, whether it is on the forehead of the high priest or whether it is not on the forehead of the high priest. This is the statement of Rabbi Shimon, meaning if the priest or some of the priests or the people are in a state of impurity when an offering is brought, the tzitz atones for them and causes the offering to be accepted, even though it shouldn't have been, because of God's mercy and compassion upon us. So if already the tzitz of the high priest is making, what would have been prohibited, permitted, because even though it's tameh, we have this kind of insurance policy. So Rabbi Yehuda says as long as it is on his forehead, it affects acceptance. But if it is no longer on his forehead, it does not affect acceptance. Like after Passover is over, then he can't bring that offering. It can't be accepted. Or if the temple is destroyed, then the tzitz is not on the forehead of the high priest. And when these guys are having these debates, it's, quite a few years after the temple was destroyed. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Yehuda, the case of the high priest on Yom Kippur can prove that your statement is incorrect, as on Yom Kippur, the tzitz is not on the forehead of the high priest during the time that he wears only linen garments when he enters. On Yom Kippur, the priest changes his clothes a bunch of times during the day. Sometimes he's wearing only linen garments in his state of absolute purity. And sometimes he's wearing all 8 garments of the high priest. A regular priest has 4 garments. A high priest has 8 garments, which we note during Hanukkah. 8 is always associated with transcending nature, infinity. And so the 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol is because he was sort of in that higher realm than other people when he was clothed in the 8 garments, which include the tzitz. But there was times on Yom Kippur when he's bringing offerings on behalf of the nation and he's not wearing the tzitz. So you're saying that then those offerings on behalf of the nation are not being accepted. And Rabbi Yehuda said to him, don't talk to me about Yom Kippur. Leave aside the case of the high priest on Yom Kippur. As since the temple service consists entirely of public offerings, the atonement of the tzitz is unnecessary. Even without the tzitz, performing the temple service in a state of impurity is permitted in cases involving the public, meaning when the majority of the public are impure, still we can bring offerings on behalf of the whole people. We have that teaching, now mentioned it a few times. If Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is readily permitted to perform temple service in the instance of public impurity, then why would he sanction intercalating the year in order to give the public more time to become ritually pure if already their offerings are going to be accepted if the majority of them are impure? Now, if it's not the majority, but it's just a lot of them, that might be a reason to intercalate because, it's only when the majority are impure that their offerings are accepted, even so. But if it's not the majority, but it's simply a lot of them, well, then on behalf of all those people, the offerings are not being accepted. Now, the Gemara rejects the question concerning the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And according to you, I think I spoke badly. I think when the majority of the people are tameh, then even if offerings are being brought in a state of tumah, they are accepted. But what you want, obviously, is that offerings themselves, the priests and the offerings, are all being brought in a state of ritual purity, are tahor. But if you can't arrange that, for whatever reason, like on Hanukkah, where they couldn't find enough oil that was pure. They had oil. What they didn't have is oil that was in sealed containers that had not been defiled by the Greeks. So since the majority of the nation at that time was impure, right, because they just come through a war, they would have been able to light the menorah from the impure oil, halachically. But it's better to light from the pure oil. And God performed that miracle for us with that one cruse of oil that was guaranteed to be pure, and it burned for 8 nights. When you don't have that the majority of the people are impure, just a lot of them, right? So then if you could only find offerings like oil or an animal, etc., that were impure, you couldn't find one that was pure, then you would not be allowed to bring it on behalf of the nation at all, right? Nobody in the nation would get an atonement because if they couldn't find any pure oil or animals. But if the majority of the nation was impure, then even if they couldn't find pure animals, they could bring impure animals or impure oil. Get it? Okay. Now, the Gemara rejects the question concerning the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So just let me get the flow again. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is readily permitted to perform temple service in the instance of public impurity, the majority, then why would he sanction intercalating the year in order to give the public more time to become ritually pure? Why would you change the year if you don't need to? So the Gemara rejects the question concerning the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. According to your reasoning, right, this is Gemara arguing with itself, and according to your reasoning, the Tosefta itself should pose a difficulty for you. The Tosefta states that Rabbi Yehuda says the court may intercalate the year due to impurity. And Rabbi Yehuda said there was an incident involving King Hezekiah, the king of Judea, who intercalated the year due to ritual impurity. But then afterward, he requested mercy for himself from God. So why would he request mercy after having made a legitimate decision? So rather, it must be concluded that the Tosefta is incomplete, and this is what it is teaching. The court does not intercalate the year due to impurity, but if the court did intercalate it, it is intercalated. right? We accept the ruling after the fact. And Rabbi Yehuda says, even if the court intercalated it, it is not intercalated. And to prove this point, Rabbi Yehuda said that there was an incident involving Hizkiah who intercalated the year due to impurity and subsequently appealed for mercy. He intercalated it, and they followed his ruling because he was the king, but the year had not been intercalated legally in proper manner by the Sanhedrin. And so the fact that they acted as if it had been intercalated is what he needed forgiveness for. So the Gemara asks, if that is so, meaning if this is the correct way to understand the Tosefta, then the next statement in the Tosefta cannot be reconciled. Rabbi Shimon says, if they intercalated the year due to ritual impurity, it is intercalated, right? It's valid. According to this explanation, this is identical to the opinion of the first Tana, who also says that the intercalation is effective. Rava said the difference between these two opinions is whether the year may be intercalated due to impurity, due to tumah, lechatchila, ab initio, in the first place. Is it permitted to say, look, a lot of people are tameh, it would be better if there was a second Adar, they'll have more time to get pure before Passover, so we're going to intercalate it on the basis of that. Okay? Now, if they did that, after the fact, okay, we accept it, but they shouldn't have done it. Or do we say they can do that? In the first place, they can do that. That's the difference between these two opinions. So according to the first Tana, although the intercalation is valid after the fact, impurity is not an appropriate reason to intercalate the year in the first place. Rabbi Shimon holds that it is an appropriate reason. And this is also taught in a Baraisa. The court may not intercalate the year due to tumah, lechatchila. Rabbi Shimon says the court may intercalate the year lechatchila. Rather, according to this opinion, for what reason did Hizkiah request compassion for himself? Because the court may intercalate only Adar, but he intercalated Nisan during Nisan, the next month, the month with Passover in it. The master said above, Hizkiah requested mercy because the court, when intercalating the year, may intercalate only the month of Adar. And he intercalated Nisan, and he intercalated Nisan because it was already Nisan. Adar had already passed. So how could Hizkiah act this way? But doesn't Hizkiah accept the following interpretive tradition? The verse states, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. That's Exodus 12:2. And that was the first commandment given to the nation of Israel as a nation. While we were still in Egypt, about to be released, about to go free, right before, I think, the final plague, the slaying of the firstborn of the Egyptians, that's when we got the commandment that this month, the month of Nisan, the month that contains Passover, shall be the first of months to you. Which is interesting, because isn't Rosh Hashanah the first month? It's the head of the year, but it's 6 months away from Nisan, the month that contains Passover. And so why did God say that this month, right, on Rosh Chodesh, 2 weeks before Passover, why did he say that this month shall be the first month? And so we have one of these kind of a tension in Torah and in the calendar, which really is the first month. So for the purpose of certain laws, we look at Nisan as the first month of the year, and Rosh Hashanah, the month of Rosh Hashanah, which is Tishrei, as the 7th month. And at other times, we look at Rosh Hashanah as the first month, and we look at Nisan as the 7th month. But the point is that this month needs to be the beginning of the year, or at least that, in other words, it needs to be in the spring. That's what we're learning here. So let's just keep reading. Where is it? He said it needs to be... Yeah. But doesn't Hizkiah accept the following tradition that the verse states, this month shall be for you the beginning of months, it shall be the first month of the year. And this teaches that this month is Nisan, the month of Passover. And another month cannot be Nisan, right? You can't add a second Nisan. Therefore, the court cannot add another month of Nisan. And the Gemara answers, Hizkiah made a mistake with regard to the law that would later be expounded by Shmuel. As Shmuel says, the court may not intercalate the year on the 30th day of Adar, since although it is part of Adar, it is fit to establish it as the first day of Nisan. as the day that may be assigned as the new moon of Nisan. It has the same status as does Nisan, and the year may not be intercalated then. So what they're telling you is, but if it was still the last day of Adar, they could still add a second Adar. He was just a day late. He wasn't a month late. He was a day late. And when he added another month, and he meant to add another Adar, but he was too late. So what he really did is he added another Nisan, and that is not permitted. And Chizkiah said, we do not say the principle since it is fit. Since it was technically still Adar, he initially thought it was permitted to intercalate the year on that day. And the Gemara notes, this opinion is also taught in a Baraisa. The court may not intercalate the year on the 30th day of Adar, since the 30th day of Adar could be declared the first day of Nisan, right? If they sanctify the new month, if they don't intercalate the month, they don't add another day, then the first day of Nisan would naturally arrive on the 30th day of Adar, right? It's not the 30th day. There were 29 days in Adar, and the next day is Nisan. But if you say, no, on that day, I'm saying that this is not the first day of Nisan, it's the 30th day of Adar, and while it's still Adar, I'm going to add another month of Adar. That's what Chizkiah thought he could do, but he couldn't. Because even if there's a possibility that that day is Nisan, it's too late to intercalate the year. And the Gemara further analyzes the Tosefta quoted above. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Chizkiah requested compassion because he encouraged the Jewish people to perform Pesach sheini, the second Pesach. What are the circumstances such that Chizkiah acted in this unusual manner and later regretted his decision? This is according to the view that he didn't add another month to the year. He simply encouraged the people to observe Pesach sheini instead of the first Pesach. So according to this view, why would he regret it? And Rav Ashi said it was a case where half the Jewish people were impure and half were pure. And the women among them completed the ranks of the pure, and the combined total then exceeded the impure ones. So a majority of the people were pure. Only a minority were impure because they were counting the women. A majority of the men were impure, but as most of the women were pure, if they included in the tally, the majority of the public was then pure. So Chizkiah was unsure whether the women should be counted, as he was unsure if they were obligated to bring the Paschal offering. Are women obligated to bring the Pesach, right? Are they obligated? Now, normally women are not obligated in time-bound positive commandments, because women are holier. They don't need to be obligated in those commandments, because women have responsibility, primary responsibility for the children, and therefore their time cannot be, reliably given to some mitzvah. So they're excused from all mitzvahs, like, for example, that they have to, put on tefillin every morning. Women are not obligated in that. Women are not obligated in praying 3 times a day. There's a lot of things women are not obligated to do. So he wasn't sure if they were obligated to bring the Korban Pesach, right? The Paschal lamb. And so then the question was, if they are obligated and most of them are pure, then the nation as a whole is only a minority impure. And so if they can't find pure sheep, then they can't bring the offering. On the other hand, if the women are not obligated and only the men are obligated and the majority of them are impure, then even if they only have impure sheep, they could bring them. So initially, he thought women have an obligation to participate in the first Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. So the minority of the Jews are impure, and a minority should be deferred to the second Pesach. Therefore, he deferred most of the men, as they were ritually impure, to bypass the first Pesach. But in the end, he thought women are permitted but not obligated to participate in the first Pesach. So when counting only the men, the impure were the majority of those obligated to bring the offering, and the majority is not deferred to the second Pesach. They should do it instead on the first Pesach. Since he had deferred them rather than follow the proper law, he asked for mercy for his decision. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. With regard to the question of intercalating the year on the 30th of Adar, the Gemara discusses the matter itself. Shmuel says the court may not intercalate the year on the 30th day of Adar, although it is still part of Adar, since it is fit to establish the day as the first day of Nisan. It's too late to intercalate and add another Adar. If they intercalated the year on that day after the fact, what is the law? So they shouldn't do it lechatchila in the first place. But if they did do it, does the year actually become intercalated and they're doing another Adar? What is the law? Ula says the intercalation is effective and the court does not sanctify the month on that day so that the intercalation will have been performed in Adar. Now that they did it, we have to make sure that the first day of Nisan is the next day after that. The Gemara asks, if another court sanctified the month, then what is the law? Rava says the intercalation is void, as it turns out that the intercalation was performed in Nisan. Rav Nachman disagrees and says the year is intercalated and the month is also sanctified because each court has performed an independently valid function. And then you would have different parts of the country on a different day of the calendar. Presumably they'd figure that out and then sync it up at the next month. Rava said to Rav Nachman, now, from Purim to Passover is 30 days. And from the time of Purim, we teach the community the laws of Passover, as it is taught in the Baraisa. The people ask questions with regard to the laws of Passover, beginning 30 days before Passover. That's Purim. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says they ask 2 weeks before Passover. If so, even during Adar, people know that Passover is approaching. And when the new moon comes, the court will distance the Passover holiday another month by adding another Adar at so late a date. And then the people will come to treat the Passover prohibitions of leavened bread lightly, right? That we can't have chametz in the house. They'll be like, well, first they told me Passover starts in 2 weeks. Now they're telling me it starts in 6 weeks. I mean, who knows what these people are doing? They'll have less respect for the dictates of the Sanhedrin, and the spiritual level of the people will drop. That's a concern. So Rav Nachman said to Rava, the masses know that the intercalated year is a matter dependent upon the calculation, which is determined by a complex process. Therefore, if this happens, that they get late notice that the year was intercalated, they will say that it is the calculation that did not conclusively emerge from the sages until now, and they will therefore understand when the true date of Passover is, and they'll respect it. That's what I've got for us tonight. Okay. Happy birthday, Renee Fott. May you have years of light and love and what do I want to say? Life and light and love and laughter to 120. We all say amen. May this year be your best year yet. Lucy, now that we have calendars and everything is determined in advance, has the halacha, the law, changed? Or are the intercalations still ceremoniously announced in addition? No, they're not ceremoniously. We don't. A court does not meet to ceremoniously announce intercalations. We do announce in every synagogue, when like we just did yesterday, Shabbos Mevarchim, on the Shabbos before a new month begins, we announce what day is Rosh Chodesh or what 2 days is Rosh Chodesh, and at what time we turn from 1 month into the next month. So we announce that throughout the Jewish world, and very ceremoniously. And in our show, we sing a really beautiful blessings and songs of praise for blessing the new month on the Shabbos before it begins. And then we celebrate Rosh Chodesh, and we say Hallel every Rosh Chodesh, and we read special portion from the Torah on that day, but we don't have a Sanhedrin getting together to even ceremoniously debate and announce an intercalation. Yosef, we lived in Israel for 3 Shemitah cycles, right? So he was there for at least 21 years. And they always imported produce from Chutz La'aretz, from outside the land of Israel, during the Shemitah year. Because sadly, right now, we're not living in a time where the spiritual level of the people is high enough that in the 6th year of a Shemitah cycle, it's like some kind of incredible bumper crop that would replace all the needs for produce in the 7th year. But we also live in a time when there's a relatively easy flow of produce and goods across national borders, so it's not so hard for the people of Israel to eat during the Shemitah year. Bill, I admit I prefer the second explanation about Chizkiah's intercalation. I'm afraid the idea that a king can get away with going outside the Torah, even for a good cause, even if he asks God for forgiveness after the fact, to turn my stomach a little. Agreed. And I think we all agree that it was much more likely that he just encouraged people to observe Pesach sheini. Or it wasn't that he was changing the law so much, it was that he just did it a day late, right? When he thought that he could still do it on Adar 30, when in fact, if he had done it on Adar 29 and declared another Adar, it would have been okay. So he wasn't so far off. And finally, Sharon, there's a few more questions. Sharon, there is still a Molad calendar released. You're talking about what I just talked about, that the date and time when we turn over from one month to the next in Jerusalem, that's announced throughout the Jewish world, and that's called the Molad. And Elvis, yet again, the idea of mindfulness jumps out at me in today's lesson. As with all other major decisions or judgments, it is to be done with careful deliberations based on the rule of law rather than haphazardly. Amen. And this mindfulness contributes to long-term stability. And the Jews being here 3,500 years later, the only such ancient people still here following the same law, same traditions, same language, etc., testifies to the truth and wisdom of this principle. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday night, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And in case you're interested, I'm going to go live in about an hour from now on Instagram, Accidental Talmudist, to talk about the word goy. Goy, right? Goy means nation. That's what the word means. Is it a word that we should be permitted to use in conversation or not? Why wouldn't it be? And I'll tease for our little circle here. Not only, in my opinion, should it be permitted, but it's a compliment. If you want to talk about that with me, come to Instagram, Accidental Talmudist at 8 p.m. Pacific in about an hour.